So this is Lab 13, and we're almost nearing the end of this course. So we're going to be working on creating a web page using HTML, PHP, and MySQL to present answers to questions the user of the page might have. So for Lab 13, our two objectives are to develop two MySQL queries that can be used to answer questions for users, and to create a PHP-empowered web page that displays results of our MySQL queries. To do that, we want to have our XAMPP install up and functioning. We want the database from Lab 10 available to use, which I have made sure that I've got that up and running. As a matter of fact, I've already worked out a query for this lab that'll present the data that we want to get from the database. This is the query right here. We'll go into it in more depth as we go along. One of the things that I always like to do, and has always worked well for me, I like to work out this query before I go to the actual coding in PHP. It always works out better, I think, to have this functional in my database. As you can see here, this is the query that I came up with. So let's go forward and start working through Lab 13. We're almost to the end of the course. Let's keep going. There's a number of things that you need before you start working on this lab. First of all, you should have read all the material that was presented in Lesson 13. There's some customer requirements in the lab description. There's a attachment, wage report PDF, and this is going to be what you're going to create your actual PHP page to act as a back-end interface to the database. So what you need to do is copy the contents of the wage report PDF into your new PHP file. The PDF provided in the lesson is secured, so I will be also providing the actual PHP page as part of my presentation on this. If I go to Visual Code, you can see I've already got that code that's in the PDF already created and in place. One of the things that you'll see in this, the very first thing we need to do is to get rid of some code that's in place, because it really doesn't work here, because we're going to run this as a standalone web page, even though we're calling it the back end. So the first thing we're asked to do, once we've got a PHP set of PHP open in our editor, is to find where hourly wage and job title are being set, and we just need to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do, rather than delete it until I know everything's going to work, I'm just going to comment that out. So that is no longer there. The next step is to create the query and actually return the data. And what they want us to return is the last name of the employees. We want their employee ID as a new return variable of ID. And then we use an aggregate function to make sure we're capturing all the hours for each employee. And we're going to do that using the sum. And like I said, I've already created that database in PHP admin. So let's look at what I've done. We're going to do a select personnel.lastname, personnel.empid as ID, sum timesheet hours worked as total. And we're going to return that from personnel timesheet, where personnel employee ID equals timesheet employee ID. That makes everything the same. Make sure we're getting the data from the same place. And then we're going to group this by personnel last name. And if we run this by clicking on Go in PHP MyAdmin, it's going to execute. And this is what it returns. So what we're going to deal with in our PHP code is a return of a table of data that has last name, ID, and total. And then it's going to return this table, and we're going to present that in a web page. So that's what we're up to now. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go ahead and copy this query that I know works. And I'm going to replace I need double quotes around that to make this work, right? So there's my query, which I know works. I'm going to give it some space. I really don't like code like this when the real pertinent part of my PHP code is all jammed up with other code. So at this point, normally what I would do is go ahead and run this just to see what it's going to do. So if I go to localhost, and again, the page we're working with is wagereport.php in my htdocs. So I just need to give it that. And so initially what we've got is quite a bit of warnings and errors. And notice that it gave me this table with just employee ID in it. So, and what it's telling me in all these warnings is my variables, job title, hourly wage, and so forth, is incorrect. So let's go through and find where these are and fix this up. So we've got on line 44, we've got an error. And that's because we got this job title thing, and that is just not right. So I'm just going to focus on what we really need. Because this page essentially was created for a different query, different assignment. So let's do this. Home, I'm just going to kill it with turning it into temporarily turn it into a comment. Now let's look down here real quick. And the reason we got that employee ID thing is because we actually did give it this right here. So what we need to do is do this up. So we've got T row, and then we've got a T header. So what we need to do is go through and give it all of what it needs for our table. So we need TH last name And then we're going to return employee ID, which we already have. I'm going to clean that up a little bit. That should not be all caps. And then lastly, we need wages. Actually, what we're returning is hours. And that should be our table starting row. And then what we're going to print out in each one of these, I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. And then we'll just go in and replace what we need for each row, for each column in the row. And that's pretty straightforward because we need last name, and then we need total. And that should work unless there's another error floating around in there that I haven't seen. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to run it without debugging. And let me just refresh this. That's interesting. So got a bit of a problem here. If we remember our query, we return the employee ID as ID. And in our code, we asked it for employee ID. Well, that's not even defined. So we need to go in and clear that up. So let's go back to our code. And this is supposed to be whatever the query is returning to us. Now, a bigger problem in my haste to reuse code, essentially, okay, I created each of those sets of data as a separate row. So that's not going to work. So let's look at that again. Okay, so I've corrected the ID part, but I shouldn't have given it this end of row tag there or there, right? Because the end of row doesn't occur until after the total is produced. So let me save this and then refresh this. Almost there. So let's look at why this might be happening. Oh, right there. We don't need the TRs at the beginning of the following rows. So again, probably would have been better if I typed it out. I would have picked up on that to begin with, but be that as may, a lot less typing by copying those things over and over. So let's go refresh this, and this should fix it up. Yep. And there we go. We have the end result that we need for this particular query. And so that is all we need to do for this lab. So we have a nice, neat table. And one thing I do want to show is if I modify the database with that aggregate function. So let's go back to our database. And if I go back to our timesheet, and let's see. So suppose I want to add 12363 employee ID Andrews as having another entry in this table. And I go to timesheet in my database, and I go to insert. So I'm going to add a new value. I'm going to go ahead and give it the same amount so that it'll basically what we'll see when we refresh the database, refresh our web page, we will get a doubling of Andrews' time. So if I go back to the table, and now I've got the same Andrews 12/3/63/35, okay, twice. And if I go back and refresh my table on my web page, boom, just like that. And this is a good example, one I had almost forgot about when I first saw this problem. I forgot about doing looking up multiple entries for the same person. And there we go. We have a doubling of the hours for Andrews. And if I go back in and delete that entry, then it would just revert back to 35. Because again, what it's doing is it's going through because of the group by, and it's adding up all the employee IDs that are the same twice. And that's all there is to the homework. You just need to follow the instructions for what you need to submit, and you'll be all done with it. Until we see each other in class again, have a great day.